talk about is a model that was developed quite a while ago by Edward T. Hall, who is an American anthropologist, cultural anthropologist, who worked for the U.S. Department of State in various countries around the world. We've also done research with Hofstede, Globe, and Schwartz, and we're aware of the research of Trompenaars. Both Hofstede and Hall look at culture as a programming of the mind that we're put into this program, and due to our cultural upbringing, we behave in certain ways in certain situations. This seems like a reasonable way to approach it. According to Hall, he sees communication as culture and culture as communication. Hofstede, if you recall, has said in the past several times that the business of international business is culture. Culture is an important issue in international business. Cultures develop to overcome problems in environments, particular environments. And human beings are generally confronted with the same kind of problems in most of the environments around the world, with weather, climate being a variable that affects culture to some degree. When we're labeling cultures, we frequently hear the idea of Eastern and Western cultures, or Asian and Western cultures. Well, these are kind of misleading labels. Asian cultures are different within each other as they are between Eastern and Western. The Southeast Asia, South Asia, Middle Eastern cultures have tremendous internal variation, perhaps greater than between, for example, Asian and European cultures. The most diverse cultural region is Sub-Saharan Africa, with sometimes relatively small countries having dozens of different languages. And language, as Hall has pointed out, communication is culture and culture is communication. So language influences culture and culture influences language. Latin American cultures have generally been influenced by their colonial heritage as much as the indigenous population. Values form the core of culture. Hofstede's seminal work back in 1980 and again in 2001 with his last book talks about models of values, cultural values. Cultural values are things that we believe in. They are what we think is rational or irrational, fair, unfair, logical, illogical, and vary across different cultures and societies. They're difficult to change, but they do change as a result of some kind of change in the ecology of the culture. Theories such as Hofstede, Schwartz, Trompenaars, the Globe Study, Englehart's World Values Surveys are models of cultural values. To get specifically back into E.T. Hall's dimension, he posited that cultures could be categorized along two dimensions: high or low context, that is the cultural context in which we live, and polychronic and monochronic time orientation. I'm sorry, spell check helps me a little too much sometimes. But if you look at Hall's work, his body of work, it's actually more complex than these two dimensions, two sets of dimensions. He talks about proxemics, that is interpersonal space, kinesics, body language, haptics, frequency of touching across cultures, within cultures, and paralanguage, voice, tone, pitch, rhythm, that affect how we hear each other and how we attempt to communicate with each other. Hall proposes that about 55 to 65% of all communication is nonverbal. Time. As I mentioned, that Hall talks about monochronic cultures and polychronic cultures. Monochronic, one time, polychronic, many times. Northern European and American managers tend to plan and schedule activities. They're a monochronic culture. In Asian and Islamic cultures, plans are negotiated to accommodate personal relationships and events. So the preferred pace of life affects people's decisions on daily activities and lifestyles, including their behavior at work. Time and use of time are social contracts, and the times we create direct the way we live. For example, in polychronic cultures, the idea of not today, in Arabic, bukra means tomorrow, sometime in the future. We've pretty much all heard of mañana in Spanish. Mañana doesn't mean tomorrow, it means not today. So in the idea of a polychronic culture, we don't necessarily talk about fixed time. We say, we're not going to do it today, but we'll do it sometime in the future. Context, high context and low context cultures. In low context cultures, meanings are conveyed primarily through written and spoken words. For example, in Germanic, Nordic, and Anglo cultures. If we encounter people from a high context culture, this direct communication can be rude and embarrassing. Similarly, in high context cultures, communication meanings are conveyed primarily through situational and nonverbal cues. So this kind of communication is rather vague and hard to understand in a low context culture. So we see that in business situations, these interaction between these two kinds of cultures can be quite difficult and frustrating. Space, using space. When I was in New Zealand, I had a graduate student who ran a ceramic tile company, and he exported to Japan. He had a very good customer, a building company in Japan, that he would go and visit every year. One year, there was a situation where he was unable to meet a delivery schedule and caused himself to lose face and his company to lose face with their customer. Normally during the meetings, he would be integrated into the group, sitting within the table of everyone else. When he missed the year that he missed the delivery, when he came in, he found the meeting set up in an entirely different fashion, with himself isolated from the rest of the group to indicate the company's disapproval of his behavior in being not able to meet the delivery schedule. Proxemics, how close we like to be to other people. Hall measured distances in the United States and found that intimate relationships, family, spouses, parent, children, tend to interact at about 18 inches, or about 45 centimeters. Personal space, that is with friends who are not intimate, about a little over a meter, 1.2 centimeters, 120 centimeters, 1.2 meters. Social distance, people that we don't know too well, people that we meet on the street, we prefer to be about 1.2 meters to 3 meters apart. If you walk down the street in a multicultural city, you can see people separating themselves with this kind of distance. Public people we don't know at all, we prefer at least about 3 meters between people in the United States at least. USA, we see about 1.2 meters apart. Jamaica, a collective culture, we have a much closer relationship between one another. Finland, of course, we don't get out much in Finland, particularly in the winter, but when we do, we use as much space as possible. China, not much room, but a lot of people, so we tend to tolerate a closer interpersonal space. Similarly, for Germany, Germany is generally a country that prefers fairly large space between individuals in most situations, but are quite comfortable with a smaller personal space in certain situations. India, much like China, a lot of people, not much space. Touching. Many cultures consider touching one another to be an appropriate behavior in public. Of course, in the United States, touching one another, particularly men, is not a comfortable situation. You'll find that when you're talking to people in Arabic countries, they may put their hand on your shoulder. They may get close enough that you can smell their breath and they can smell your breath, and that's quite acceptable and customary behavior. Time. As I mentioned, monochronic time and polychronic time. Monochronic time tends to schedule, organize, and plan. Polychronic time, much less attention to schedules, organizations, and planning. Past orientation, time orientation. What occurs has happened before. There's nothing new. And the past is a good way to look at to predict the future. Present orientation, the past probably will not happen again, and the future is unpredictable. So the only thing that is real and important is what's happening now. Future orientation, we expect things to happen as we predict. And what we like to do is to create the future. We predict, schedule, and plan, and change what is to come to fit our desires. Polychronic involves in people as opposed to schedules. We complete transactions rather than meet a schedule. Appointments are not taken seriously, not nearly so much as in monochronic time. Time is less tangible in polychronic time than in monochronic time. Time is seldom experienced as wasted in polychronic cultures. We see time as a point rather than a ribbon or a road. So we are more present orientated in polychronic cultures. Monochronic cultures, we pay attention to schedules, we segment time and use time in blocks, half hour, hour, 15 minutes. We emphasize promptness and punctuality. We compartmentalize events. If we have a meeting, that meeting is what we do when we're in the meeting. And we go there, we're there for a particular amount of time, and at the end of that time, we leave the meeting. We tend to do one thing at a time. If we're in a meeting and someone else comes in, we tend to continue with the meeting that we're in and deal with the person who's joined us at a later time. We set priorities for people and for functions. We need to do this first, this next, and this can be done last. We schedule a limited number of events in a limited time frame. So in polychronic cultures, we're involved with people, we're involved with transactions rather than schedules. Planning isn't firm, can be easily broken or changed, and appointments can be broken without serious consequences. Alan Bluedorn looks at cultures and has studied them after A.T. Hall, finds that most cultures have a continuum. Some parts of the cultures are more polychronic, some parts of the cultures are more monochronic. This is a summary of what I've just discussed. I'll let you take a glance at it. Individuals can be monochronic or polychronic. Hall found that gender and polychronicity are mixed, that really the culture is more influential than gender in terms of whether a person is polychronic or monochronic in their behavior and values. Polychronic people tend to be more extroverted, more favorably inclined to change, more tolerant of ambiguity, generally have a higher education, are more likely to strive for achievement, are more impatient and irritable, and more often late and absent. Monochronic cultures tend to be countries such as Germany, England, the Nordic cultures, the United States. Japan is an interesting study. Japan has interacted, particularly after World War II, with the United States as a monochronic culture and Japan as a polychronic culture. So in Japan, the behavior in business tends to be monochronic, but the behavior in social relationships tends to be polychronic. Interesting country. Polychronic cultures, Southern Europe, Italy, Spain, to some degree France, the Near East, the Arab world, Northern Africa, Latin America, particularly Brazil, and Southeast Asia. Clock time and event time. We have a business meeting between a group from Germany and a group from Italy. They decide to have dinner that evening, and they decide at a restaurant, and they decide that they'll meet at 8:30 p.m. What does this agreement imply to the two groups? The German group sees this as we have an appointment tonight at 8:30 p.m., a monochronic culture, and we'll have dinner. The Italian group will have dinner tonight together. We'll be there sometime after 8:30 p.m., and we'll make an effort to be there before 9:30 p.m. So two different concepts of what they've just agreed to. Kristen and Kim, a study in 2003, these polychronic and monochronic cultures generally lead to high conflict when you're doing business across cultures. Lots of complaints in terms of people being serious or not serious about schedules. People in monochronic cultures tend to think in units of 5 minutes. Our historic watchmaking country, Switzerland, for example, produced the first watch, first mechanical watch, divided time into 5-minute blocks. If the watch had been invented in Saudi Arabia, we might have only 4 numbers on the clock. Saudi Arabians think in terms of 15 minutes. So people you'd have to be 20 minutes late to a meeting before feeling the need to apologize for being late. This is an interesting chart of expectations when you're having social appointments. I'll let you look through this. When you're dealing across cultures, I find this a useful approach, is when you're talking to people about meetings and schedules, you talk about what time you're using. In New Zealand, a multicultural country with a Polynesian population, the Maori, and a predominantly European population, we would talk about island time or European time. I've heard people use terms such as Malaysian time, Filipino time, island time, Hawaiian time to indicate how punctual people will be in terms of attending meetings, scheduling, and meeting schedules. If we want it to be taken seriously, we might talk about, okay, our meeting is going to be at 9:30 a.m. American time, German time, or Japanese time. Remember, Japanese are monochronic when we're dealing in business situations. High status people communicate their position by making lower status people wait for them. High status people don't necessarily have to meet rigid schedules. They expect people to accommodate them as they are more powerful and what they do is more important. When we work between cultures where the times are different, there is a great deal of stress. If we agreed to a 9 o'clock meeting, on time in Germany would be 8:50 a.m. And Italy, it would be like 9 o'clock, maybe 9:30. These fit fairly well into Hofstede's model. High context cultures would tend to be individualist cultures. Low context cultures would tend to be collectivist cultures. I'll make this available to anybody who wants to email me. I'll send you a copy. You can find me on pretty much any kind of Google search with my Russian ID, which is r.littrell@hse.ru. So there's some recommended readings that are free online. There are quite a few very useful videos on Hall's model. And feel free to contact me if you'd like a copy.